Hello everyone, you're listening to For Those We Lost. I'm your host, Jennifer Sullivan. Thank you for being here. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com. Or you can go to the website forthosewelostpodcast.com and click on the contact button and you can reach me that way as well. In this show, people share their stories of losing a loved one to COVID. Every story you hear in this show is full of heartbreak, grief, loss, and frustration, but they are also full of love and hope. We talk about how we are coping, we talk about how to keep the memory of our loved ones alive, and how isolating our grief is as the world wants to move on. You'll hear us talk a little bit about the vaccine and politics, and you may not agree, but I hope you'll keep listening because each person who shares their story on this show has experienced profound grief over the loss of a loved one. And that's something we will all experience. We all love someone, we will all lose someone we love, and we will all grieve. These are the stories of those we lost to COVID. Thanks for being here with me. I've got a wonderful show coming up for you today. Today, I'll be talking to Jerri in West Virginia. Jerri lost her husband, James, to COVID pneumonia on January 1st, 2021. And just 6 weeks later, she lost her mother-in-law, also to COVID. Jerri has 2 girls, and they lost their dad and their grandma within 6 weeks of each other. James was a retired Marine and was a police officer in their small town. As Jerri says, James was a hometown hero and everybody knew him. Even the people he'd arrested sent their condolences. For context, we recorded this episode on December 30th, 2021, just a couple of days before the 1-year anniversary of James's passing. Jerri became active in the COVID advocacy community with COVID Survivors for Change. She was also featured on Yahoo News, CBS News, and the Stolen Goodbyes podcast. Currently, Jerri is an admin of a COVID Young Widows Facebook group. So if you listen to this episode and you are a young COVID widow, Jerri can help. Finally, Jerri mentions the Comfort Zone Grief Camp her girls attended last summer. All these are listed in the show notes below. And now, I'd like to welcome Jerri to the show. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad you reached out to me. You lost your husband on January 1st of 2021.
Yes.
And then you lost your mother-in-law, his mother, 52 days later.
Yes. We lost her February the 21st, so it was within like 6 weeks, my girls, and so we lost James and his mom within 6 weeks.
Wow, and you live in West Virginia.
Yes, southern West Virginia.
Okay, do you live in a more rural area or near a city?
It's more rural here.
Okay. I think where I'd like to start is where you and your family were at when COVID came into your lives. Like, what were you doing? What was going on with your girls, your schedule, your life, and your husband?
Well, when COVID first started, we did the lockdown and quarantined at home and did our best to stay safe. My husband was a police officer, so he was essential. He was out every day. I'm a teacher, but that was when schools had shut down. So we we really did. We thought we did everything right, you know. He would come home from the police department. He would change in the garage. He would come in and immediately shower. We didn't take the girls anywhere for like 50 some days. Like they didn't even leave the house really. Other than to go in the backyard or something. Um, June came around and my husband decided he was going to retire. He had his time. So he retired at the end of June. And then he stayed home with us every day, honestly, for about a month. And James was the type he just could not sit. Like it just wasn't him. And he's young. So he said he wanted to get a part time job driving a forklift. And I laughed because I was like, a forklift? Really? But if you knew James, like there honestly was nothing that the man couldn't do. He was so talented. Like he was in the Marine Corps and he had gotten all these mechanic skills and things from the Marine Corps. He could fix anything. So him telling me he wanted to drive a forklift, there was never a question in my mind that he couldn't do it, but it was just such a different change
Mm-hmm.
from the life we had lived. So he did get a job at the mall here, unloading trucks, like as they come in with the goods and stuff. And he still did the same thing, you know. Then that fall we went back to school. But he still, you know, when he come home, he changed out of his clothes immediately. Same thing for me. I would change my clothes. We were super careful with the girls. Masked everywhere that we had to go. We weren't really doing any hanging out with family, hanging out with friends. You know, we just kind of stayed to ourselves. And he had to, like, November came, he had to work Thanksgiving Day. But we weren't going to spend Thanksgiving with my parents or his parents because of COVID. We just didn't want to take the chance. And I was going to cook my first Thanksgiving meal. And he said, well, they've asked me to work this morning some because of Black Friday. And I said, well, that's fine. You know, you can go in and work while I'm cooking. There's no point in that. So he went in that morning and worked, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours. Actually, it was probably about 4 or 5 hours. And he come home and, you know, I had this huge spread made for us. And it's the first time I ever cooked a turkey. I was terrified that it wasn't going to turn out right. And he took his parents a plate. Like we just had so much food, but he took his parents a plate. And you know, it was our last day, normal day as a family together. We watched the recording of the parade because we always record the parade every year. So he watched the parade with the girls. We watched some football. He went out to his garage and worked. He loved doing like woodworking stuff. So then, like when we would kind of get in the evenings and start kind of relaxing or chilling out, he would always go out to his garage and work for a while. So he goes out and, you know, he worked the weekend and then Monday or Tuesday night, he gets a little cough. Not much of anything. Our heat had been messed up and we had to put a new furnace in. So he swore it was from the dryness of the new furnace because we have natural gas heat. So he was like, I think it's just from the furnace, not a big deal. And he had no other symptoms. Well, that was on, like I said, Monday or Tuesday. Thursday night, I tell him, I have a tickle in my throat. And he started laughing. And you have to know this is James. He laughed all the time. We picked at each other all the time. And he looked at me and he looked at Jame, our youngest, and said, I live with the three most dramatic women in the world. And he would always tell us that about everything. He'd be like, oh, I live with three women. Somebody needs to pity me. And Jamie was like, Daddy, I'm only 7. I'm not a woman. He said, well, you're already starting out that way. So I told him, I said, well, honestly, if my throat still feels like this in the morning, I need to go get tested. And he was like, he just kind of rolled his eyes and said, you do you. Don't wake me up. I don't work tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, just us joking, you know, that's how we were. So the next morning I get up and I had one nostril that was stopped up, like just one side of my sinuses. And I was like, I teach second grade, so I was like, well, there's no way I can go to school. If I'm sick, I won't be able to live with myself. So
Yeah.
that was when, COVID was still so unknown, which I know it still is, but there was so much unknown to it.
Hmm.
So I go test. Well, I go to the doctor. She even tells me, I don't think it's COVID. I think it's a sinus infection, but let's test just for your peace of mind. She said, it'll take about 15 minutes to do the rapid. I said, okay. So the nurse comes in, swabs my nose. The doctor comes back in like 5 minutes.
Oh,
And
wow.
the first thing she says is, well, positive. And I was like, excuse me? We had spent 8 months at that point avoiding this. And to be told that in such like a matter of frank way, I was like, I don't know even know how to describe the feeling of hearing it. It was shock. And then I was like, well, my husband's got it too. And she looked at me. I said, he's had a cough since Monday. And so I immediately texted him and I said, I'm positive. So instead of texting me back, he called me. He was like, you're joking with me. And I was like, no, I'm not. He said, if you're messing with me just to get me up, I was like, I swear to you, I'm not joking. I said, get up, get ready. I'm taking you and the girls to get tested. And he said, why are you getting the girls tested? I said, because they're with us constantly. So I come home. I got him, both girls. We load up. We go to our local health department, who happened to be doing a testing that day. And we all tested. And by the time we got home from getting him or getting all of them tested, he was like feverish and he was starting to feel really bad, which would have been about day 5 or 7 for him.
Yeah.
And he was like, so anyway, he was positive. Well, that was on Friday afternoon. By Friday night, he was laying on the couch. He didn't want to get up. Like he was just really congested, shivering, just all the normal symptoms that they were saying. Saturday night, he started where he couldn't keep anything down. I mean, he couldn't even keep a drink of water down. So he was throwing up violently. And one of our good friends is a nurse practitioner at the ER here. And I had talked to her and I was like, because sometimes, he was a man, he was stubborn. If he had something else going on, like I would have to text her and be like, hey, can you talk to James about this? He probably really needs to see a doctor, but so I texted her and I was like, listen, James is dehydrated. I said, I know he is. I said, he's not been able to keep anything down. I said, we had one of our friends bring Gatorade. He can't keep Gatorade down. He can't keep Pedialyte down. So she texts him and he comes and tells me, he says, hey, she texts me and wants me to come to the ER, but I'm not going till tomorrow morning. This was like probably sometime in the middle of the night, Saturday night, Sunday morning. And I was like, okay, Sunday morning. He was like, no, I'm going to go Monday. She's off tomorrow. I was like, well, you can still go to the emergency room. He was like, I don't want to see anybody but her.
Yeah.
Which, at that point, we really didn't think he was that bad, even when he left. So the next morning, Monday morning, he gets up. It's December the 7th. I'm upstairs with the girls. He's downstairs. He yells and tells me he's getting ready to go. So I go down the stairs and tell him bye. And I'm like, hey, let me drive you. And he said, I'm okay. I said, if you start throwing up while you're driving, I don't want you in that position. He was like, no, it's okay. They're not going to let you in anyway. Just stay here. I'll be home in a few hours. He said, if they give me something for the nausea that makes me not be able to drive, I'll call you. Okay. I mean, so we tell him bye and he leaves. That was the last time we ever saw him. They called me probably about 4 hours after him being at the ER. The doctor calls and she said, I haven't told him this yet, but we have to admit him. And I said, okay, why haven't you told him? She said, because you know how he can be as a patient. And I said, well, what's going on? She said, his lungs look really bad. And I said, he's not even coughing that bad and he's not struggling to breathe. And she said, well, I think we're ahead of it, but I need to admit him. She said, the problem is there's no beds here. That's when there was a major bed shortage everywhere.
Yeah.
So she starts asking me about places to send him. And I was like, listen, I would really feel best if you send him to Ruby Memorial, or like that's West Virginia University. That's like probably our biggest hospital in the state. And I was like, I just want him somewhere where there's not just 5 or 6 COVID patients. Like, I want him somewhere where they're dealing with this daily and that they know what they're doing. I don't want him sent to a smaller facility. I want him to get the best care. So they did. They sent him, which there was nowhere else closer anyway. We lucked out on a bed. So that night around midnight, they transferred him to West Virginia University. When they got him there and got him all settled in, his O2 sat was still holding pretty well. They had him on the oxygen. I talked to him. The next morning, we talked to him. Um, Probably at like 10 o'clock. Well, the girls were showing symptoms at that point. So he, that was his main concern, like always. Hey, how's the girls? How are you? And I was like, I'm sick, but I'm making it. I said, and the girls are starting to show a little bit of symptoms, but nothing bad, so don't worry.
Yeah.
And um, he was, I told him, because he just kept telling me, don't worry about me, da 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 da. I said, turn your phone around so I can see what your vitals look like. And his vitals at that time looked good. Like, his blood pressure was good, his O2 was good. I mean, it wasn't great, it was 89%, but he was talking and he was not on like the high flow BiPAP or any of that stuff. So I thought, you know what? He's got COVID. 89% is pretty good. Plus, he's talking. So I take the girls to the pediatrician. I had called her and I said, listen, they're starting to show symptoms now. Their test Friday was negative, but I'm pretty sure they're positive now. So I take them to the pediatrician. She comes out to the car, fully gowned up and stuff, and she swabs them, and sure enough, they were positive at that point. While we're in the parking lot, the doctor from WVU calls and says, um, we need to consider putting him on a ventilator. And I was like, whoa, 3 hours ago, I was talking to him.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I think we're ahead of it. He said, but we have to do some legal stuff for you guys. He said, there is not a living will in place. And I was like, no, at our age, you don't really think you need one of those. I said, although with him being a police officer, it's probably something we should have had. But no, so James called me and he said, listen, there's an attorney. So we ended up doing a conference call, but he said, listen, there's an attorney on the phone here for the hospital. There's like a social worker. I have to tell them that I'm giving total control to you. And I was like, okay, but you're going to be fine. I think this is just overkill. And in my mind, I just kept thinking, this is this is overkill. Like, there's no need to do all of this. So I gave her he made me his medical power of attorney. We did all this stuff. They let me FaceTime with him. He was upset, scared. I lost it. Um, I hate that our last real conversation was me losing it like that, because I just kept crying and couldn't stop crying. And he was like, you're making this harder. But, um, so within 24 hours of going from our hospital to the other hospital, they were preparing to put him on the vent, which the doctor then called me and said, are you familiar with ECMO? And I was like, just what I've seen on Grey's Anatomy, but nothing
Yeah.
like, like nothing real.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I don't know that we need it. He said, but I think if we could get him on ECMO, and get ahead of it further, that would help. He said, because I really like your husband's chances. He said he's strong and he's fit and he's, they were calling him strongman at the hospital because, like, apparently when they would try to, I don't know, he got the name strongman. But he was like, you can just tell that his body, his muscles and stuff, you can just tell that he he can fight this. He's not weak and frail. He's strong enough to fight this. So I said, okay, you can put him on ECMO. So we get off the phone and I'm like frantically Googling ECMO procedures, and I'm like, oh, let me stop Googling because it was freaking me out.
What is ECMO?
Um, they basically hook up a machine with a tube like coming out of your neck that all of your blood pumps out of your body through your neck. It goes through the machine, it gets reoxygenated and back through your groin. It completely circumvents the lungs. It does the job of the lungs, but gives your time your so all of his butt, and they're going through like two main arteries. So you have this tube that's like, and they have to like cut into your artery. Like it was
Oh,
crazy.
yeah.
So they called me back, and it was a nurse that time. And she said, "So we have a little bit of a problem." And at that point, when you get a phone call that says we have a little bit of a problem, you panic.
Mm-hmm.
She says, "We are going to put him on ECMO, but we don't have a room." And I was like, "What do you mean?" Apparently, they're limited to the amount of ECMO patients that they could have. So she said, "But we're going to send him to Pittsburgh." Um, she said, "We're trying to set up the helicopter now. We're going to fly him to Pittsburgh. They've agreed to take him." Once again, it was real late at night. So this is only about 36 hours after everything. And, he was already on the vent at this point. So I was like, do what you have to do. By all means, Pittsburgh's only another hour, hour and a half plus past where he was. I didn't like that he was going to be so far away from home, but it's better than the alternative. So, I don't know. Like I said, I was sick through that. So I guess I went to sleep. I remember waking up around 3:30 in the morning to Pittsburgh calling me, telling me that they had received him. They had him on the vent. He was on ECMO. He was stable. But at the same time, saying you're stable when you're on an ECMO, you're not really stable ever. I mean, it's because, like, if that tube would come out of his neck, he could bleed out. There's just so much. You're not stable even though you're stable.
Mm-hmm.
So, he spent 8 days on ECMO, which a lot of people, it's really hard for them to come off. He made great progress. Once again, the nurses were all calling him Strongman. They would talk to him. A couple of the nurses I actually have gotten to know really well through all of this, and I appreciate the care that they gave him. But they really like it made me feel better about not being able to be there. That's something that I've really struggled with this year is that I wasn't with him for the last month, and that I wasn't there. But knowing that they would talk to him about me and the girls, and like when the nurses would call to give me updates, they would say, "Hey, you sound pretty rough today. Are you taking care of yourself? Have you thought about going to the hospital yourself?" Like it wasn't just a blanket update and done. So after 8 days of being on ECMO, the doctor said, "Hey, I think we're to the point where we can get him off of this." He said, "And I'm going to take him out of CVICU, which is COVID ICU, and just put him in." No, he was in an ECMO unit. They were going to put him in the COVID ICU. He said he'll still be in the vent, but he won't be as critical. He said, and we'll start weaning it back. His labs are looking better, things like that. And, every time I would be like, "Does the rest of," because I was hearing about all these people who were having organ failure and things, and they were like, "No, his kidneys are doing great." Like all along, everything was going great. Well, then they get him off the ECMO and get him upstairs, and his heart went into an irregular rhythm. They called me, and so of course I freak out. And they say, "No, we think it's because of all the different medications he's getting, and we're trying to cut back on him now. We can wean back because they had to put him on so many paralytics to keep him still through the ECMO." And they kept saying that was one of the whole strongman things because a normal dose of the paralytics was not putting him down. So
Mm.
they were having to give him extra because I don't know, I guess medicine had a different effect on him. So we spent a few days really not making progress, but not going backwards. And they told me, "Hey, this is This is a long thing. You're in it for the long haul. Side steps are fine as long as we don't take steps backwards. And um, then we would have a couple of days where they would say, "Oh, today was kind of a setback with his oxygen," or then they would try to wake him up so they could start the process to get him off of the ventilator. And he would get so agitated, and that they would get worried that he was going to pull his tube out or something, so they'd have to paralyze him again. And so we went back and forth with that for a few days, which honestly, if you were trying to wake me up and I had a tube down my throat, I would probably wake up very agitated as well.
Yeah, I agree.
So they finally got to the point where they were like, "Hey, we're going to try to take him off the vent. We think we can get him awake." Um, Actually, on Christmas Day, they turned back the medication enough for us to be able to talk to him. He was still on the vent. Obviously, he could not talk to us, um, but he could, I guess, blink when we said something to him. So
Mhm.
we knew that he could hear us. Then on the next day is when they actually were able to get him off the vent. That morning, the nurse had made me, like, when I called, she was like, "His O2's going crazy this morning. I don't know that they're still going to do it." So it was kind of like one of those mornings where I was like, ugh. And we were all negative at that point, so I knew that I had to get the girls and myself out of the house. So I was like, we just need out of here for the day. I can't sit here anymore. So we are driving, and a doctor calls, and he says, "Are you on a secure line?" And immediately I thought the worst. And I said, "Well, I'm driving right now. My kids can hear me. It's on Bluetooth. Let me take the first exit and get you off of Bluetooth so that my children don't hear anything." And
Mhm.
the doctor's like, "Well, I have good news." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he was like, "We got him off the vent. He's holding steady." He said, "If we can keep him off of this vent for 24 to 48 hours, I believe we might be able to say he's made the turn." I said, "Okay." So then for the next 48 hours, I clung to the phone, praying that, every call was not that they had to put him back on the ventilator. We got to the point where a doctor calls me and says, "Hey, I think he's going to be our success story. We need to start talking about physical therapy and occupational therapy and all these different therapies." So in my mind, I thought they're not going to waste their resources. They're not going to do physical therapy and things if they don't think he's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And New Year's Eve is Julia's birthday, and I said, "Listen, my girls wanted to talk to him for Christmas and couldn't." I said, "I know his voice is still real raspy and he can't, it's real like a whisper, but he had been on a vent for 24 days. So it made sense." I said, "But is there any way we can do a FaceTime tomorrow for his birthday?" And the nurse said, not for his birthday, but for Julia's birthday. And the nurse said, "Absolutely. I'm going to shave him, give him a bath, get him all cleaned up for you guys." And I did have some pictures that they had sent me, like of him not shaved and stuff, which was kind of funny because with him being a police officer for as long as I've known him, he had never not been clean shaven. So it was
Mhm.
just so I said, "Great, thank you." I sent a gift basket to the hospital for the nursing staff. I was, appreciated everything so much that he was getting his care. And then so that my kids wouldn't be scared, they were going to clean him up and shave him and everything. And we did. We had a wonderful talk with him. All three of us got to talk with him. He rolled his eyes at me a few times, when I would make like joking comments, and Jamie was like, "Mommy, Daddy laughed at you," and rolled his eyes. And for the first time, we really thought, he's coming home. He's in there. That's himself. He wouldn't rolled his eyes at me. Like he's back in his mind. That's James. And He wanted to write something to us. He asked the nurse he had a marker and a whiteboard, and he tried to write, but his arm was just too weak. You couldn't make it out. And I will always wonder what he was trying to write to me, I guess. But, after we got off the phone call, I took Julia out to eat for her birthday. We were excited. It was just finally good news, like
Yeah.
really good news.
Mm-hmm.
And I called around midnight and told his nurse, I was like, can you just tell him that we said Happy New Year's? And his nurse called me back around 2 a.m. and said, I just wanted you to know that I went in and told him, that you said Happy New Year's and that you and the girls had some sparkling grape juice and that you were going to toast the New Year and head to bed. And he said, and he smiled so big and said, love them. And he said, well, I'll tell them that you said that. So I went on to sleep and I slept the best sleep that I had had in a month. Like I finally felt peace in my body that I could go to sleep. And I woke up the next morning and I looked at the clock and it was 9:04. And I thought, oh my gosh, like I've normally called the hospital by 7:15 every morning.
Yeah.
So I couldn't believe that I had actually slept that long. And I said, oh, the nurses are probably going to think I'm hungover or something that I haven't called. And as soon as I called, I got the feeling something was wrong because, like, I would go through the same spiel every morning. Hey, this is Jerry. Can I talk to whoever James's nurse is this morning? And everybody, it'd been a month of me calling. So by this point, everybody was getting to know me. Like the people who answered the phone, the nursing staff would be like, oh, sure. Hey, I'm not his nurse today, but let me get, and they were like, what patient? And I said, James Vance. And she said, please hold. And I was like, oh. And
Oh,
but then I even thought, well, maybe they just don't, maybe they're not happy that they're at work on New Year's. So then another person picks up and says, who are you holding for? And I said, James's nurse. And she said, please hold, and puts me back on hold. So it ends up being like four people pick up the phone before anybody will tell me what's going on. Finally, the charge nurse gets on the phone. She says, hey, I'm the charge nurse today. She said, there's been some issues this morning. We had to re-intubate him. And I was like, hold up. I was told if there were any changes, I would be notified. And she said, well, do you object to us having him on the ventilator? And I was like, no, by all means, I don't. But last night he was talking to us. So what happened over the last 12 hours? And she said, well, this morning, she said, we're not really sure. His O2 has dropped. She said, we cannot get it up. He's at 100% on the ventilator. She said, they thought maybe at first that his lung had collapsed. She said, we've done the test. It was not a collapsed lung. She said, we cannot get him stable enough to take him down to do a CT to see if it's a blood clot. And I was like, well, can you not just treat it as if it is a blood clot, even if it's not? And she said, that's probably what we're going to do, but a doctor's going to call you. And in my mind, I thought, I'm going to Pittsburgh. So I asked her, I was like, can I come? And she was like, no, honey, we haven't changed our visitation policy. And I thought, there's nothing keeping me away from Pittsburgh today. I'm going. One of my best friends is an RN. I called her real quick. I said, me and the girls are going to Pittsburgh. Here is the number to the hospital. Here is James's patient access code. I said, call and see what they tell you. So the next thing I know, she's calling me back and she says, I'm picking you up. I'm taking you. They had arranged a police escort from here to Pittsburgh. Um, and basically, they had told her he wasn't going to make it, that they would try to sustain him long enough for me to get there. And so the doctor calls and he tells me that he's like, I'm so sorry. And I could tell he was upset too. He was like, I really thought he was going to be one of our success stories. He said, but with COVID, there's just so much unknown and we don't really know what is causing this. And how fast can you get here and things like that. So The whole way I'm getting updates. Well, about an hour and a half into the trip, I called and the nurse said, his O2 has stabilized for now. Well, even in my head, then I thought, he's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is my James. He's going to be okay. He's fighting through this. And so then, not long after that, another doctor calls and says, um, do you want us to do CPR? And I was like, do you need to do CPR? And he said, well, we've with heart rates like they're like his is trending and his blood pressure and stuff, if it happens, we need to know. And I was like, absolutely, do everything you can. And he tells me, he was like, so you do want all life-saving measures? And I was like, yes, I do. So then maybe another hour, um another doctor calls and says, he is coded, we're doing CPR, do you want us to continue? And I was like, yes, I want you to do everything you can. And it had been about 35 minutes. And I told my friend that was driving me, I said, he's gone. And she said, no, they would have called you back. I said, they're not doing CPR for an hour. I was like, they're not going to work him that long. And sure enough, it wasn't a few minutes later, the phone rang and it was one of his attendings. And he had 5 or 6 different doctors. And he told me, he said, at 12:21, James left us. And I had my moment. Then I realized I had to tell my girls and stuff. And, it was just from basically from 10 o'clock the night before when we talked to him to 12 o'clock the next day, he was gone.
Yeah.
Um, Apparently, where they had did physical therapy the 2 days prior, they think maybe that it was like a blood clot in his leg that had broken loose and went to his lung. Or like, like that blood clot broke loose and is what started the problem because there were so many clotting issues with
Yeah.
COVID. The police officers, it was West Virginia State Police, they went ahead and took me to the Pennsylvania line. Pennsylvania State Police picked us up and then took us into Pittsburgh, and then Pittsburgh City Police took us to the hospital. We had escort. Everybody was amazing. The hospital did go ahead and let me in to see him.
Oh, that's
When I
good.
got there, they already had like a pass laying at the security desk for me. They had cleaned him up and taken everything out of the room, and it was surreal. I mean, I saw him on the FaceTime the night before, but over the month he had lost probably 50 pounds. I mean, it was just crazy to see what COVID had done to him. I mean, I guess when he left, other than a cough, he was still his normal size, his normal James, and then, I mean, and I guess it just opened my eyes to how much it really did ravish his body. Like it wasn't, and I mean, I don't feel like there was anything that anybody could have done. I don't think I think he received top notch care. 5 different doctors came into the room with me. 2 of them had tears in their eyes right along with me. When I walked down the COVID unit where he was, every single patient in that unit was on a ventilator except for James. He was the only one not on a ventilator. And the nurse and the doctor pointed that out and said, see, you can see why we had so many hopes. He's the only one here that was showing improvements. And it was so like I was talking to the nurse, and it was just so hard because they were seeing death every day. And the one patient that they got, like
Hmm.
she joked, but they kind of all got attached to him because he was the one making progress. He was the one that was giving them hope. So it was just, this is unreal. And then, like I said, it took a few days to get all the permits and stuff to bring him back home from Pennsylvania. Um, they brought him home with, like a police, and I think there were some fire trucks and ambulances that brought him home. But his department went up and escorted him all the way back. Um, we had his services January the 6th, and my mother in law, that was really the last time she went out of the house until she was tested positive. I called, like, we got to the point where, like, she would call me or I would call her to check on her every day. And I hadn't heard from her the night before, so I called, and my father in law had told me that he had to call an ambulance for her. She was sick. I never dreamed that she had COVID because she was sick. I mean, she wasn't in the best health to begin with, so she kind of knew that. And that was on February the 1st. And that night around midnight, the hospital called me and said, she is COVID positive. And, I just thought, here we go again. Here we go again. And I remember at one point, one of the nurses giving me an update. And I said, I'm not trying to be rude, but I don't need your sunshine and roses updates because I just lived this life. I just lived this for a month.
Yeah.
I know how fast it can change. And 3 weeks after she went into the hospital, she passed away. Um, we were told on Saturday that she would not make it, that she could not come off of the ventilator, and my father-in-law and my brother-in-law and myself had to make the decision that to just peacefully remove her from the vent. He said that, and I mean, and so that's what happened. But her lungs were so ravaged by it. She already had COPD prior to that, so there was just, her lungs were done. I mean, so COVID pretty much ravaged through us. I mean,
Very quickly.
yeah.
Yeah. So, how was your holiday this year? Because when we talked on the phone, you mentioned that last year you and your girls were essentially in this place of we're going to wait for dad to come home before we open presents.
Um, well, Christmas, we tried to do our normal stuff. Christmas Eve, we always open presents here at the house, and we stuck to that. It was rough. I think all three of us had moments of breakdowns. Christmas Day, I'm not gonna lie, I would have just rather stayed in the bed, but I couldn't for the kids. Like for the girls, I knew that I had to go through the motions at least, and that's pretty much what I did. We went to my parents, which is what we always did on Christmas Day. We always went to his parents and then my parents. And Jamie actually said, "Mom, you have sweatpants on." And I said, "Yes, I do." And she's
Yeah.
in her cute little Christmas outfit, and she's like, "Are you going to change before we leave?" I said, "Listen, if nobody can take me for what I'm worth today in my sweatpants and my t-shirt, then I don't need to go." And she was like, "No, it's okay." I said, I have no desire. You're lucky I'm out of bed and out of my pajamas." And so it was just, but that's how my Jamie is. She thinks she has to be fancy everywhere she goes. And she's my little ballerina. And that's Jamie. If she could dress up every single day, she would. And apparently she doesn't like when mommy wears sweatpants. So we went to my mom's for a little while, and then we came home. And honestly, Christmas Day wasn't as bad. The Christmas Eve really got me because that was that was our family day. And like being Santa by myself this year, like, it would always be text messages of this one's asleep. Just go check on that one, and like both of us scared to walk around, didn't want to wake them up, and then that was when like him and I would have our time. And I can remember like it's funny now, but one of his favorite TV shows to watch with me was Chrisley Knows Best. And we would sit up, most of the night wrapping presents, binge watching Chrisley Knows Best almost every single year since it came out. And I happened to flip the channel, and it was on USA that night for a marathon. And I lost it because he should have been here with me wrapping presents.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, Christmas Eve was a lot harder than Christmas Day was. Um, it was the first time in 16 years that I haven't been at my in-laws on Christmas morning. And like as bad as I hurt for myself, I hurt for my father-in-law just as bad because he was married for 57 years
Wow.
and then he lost his son.
Hmm.
So it wasn't, I mean, if anybody knows the heartache I feel, it's him more
Yeah.
because, so I don't know. I guess this whole week I've just been really, and I dread tomorrow and Saturday because Julia has already said that she doesn't want to come out of her room tomorrow. Tomorrow's her 13th birthday. Becoming a teenager is supposed to be special
Yeah.
and a big deal,
Yeah.
but she will always associate her daddy dying with her birthday.
Hmm.
And even if it could have happened, I mean, even if I could go back and I knew he was going to pass away, if I could have picked a day, or I know that sounds crazy, but anything for it not to be her day.
Yeah.
Because for the rest of her life, my grandfather, my grandfather passed away on Thanksgiving in 1980, and I can remember growing up being 5, 6, 10 years old, 12 years old. Well, growing up my entire childhood, I can remember my grandmother always being sad on Thanksgiving. And I can remember, Thanksgiving dates change every year, but I can remember when my mom would say, like when Thanksgiving fell on the 25th or whatever, it would be today's 20 years since daddy's been gone. But, you know, Julia will always know that her birthday is essentially when she lost her daddy.
Yeah.
And he was her person in all sense of the word. They were so close. She would choose her daddy over me any day. I don't, I don't fault her for that, but her daddy was her best friend. And, he loved all his kids. He didn't make a difference or anything like that, but him and Julia just had this special bond, that, like, she would choose to, like, last year, Christmas time, the weekend of after Thanksgiving, like our town does a big Christmas lights display, and I remember I was like, let's go look at the lights. This was before we knew we were sick. And I was like, let's go look at the lights. And Julia was like, I don't want to go. And James was like, I'll just stay here. And then she was like, but I am hungry because I said we'd go out to eat and go look at the lights. And he was like, well, why don't you and Jamie go look at the lights? And then Julia and I'll go to dinner. Like it was nothing for them two to just go do something on their own because her and Jamie are so different. They weren't into ever really doing the same things unless we were on like our family vacations or whatever. So it ended up being those two quite a bit. And they would just do stuff like that all the time. And I just hate that she lost her person in this world on her birthday, and that will always stick with her.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's nothing I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. It's one
No.
of those things that just is, and there's no amount of time or anything that's gonna change it.
Yeah, there's nothing.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned is that you've turned a lot of your feelings into advocacy. And can you tell us about that and the Facebook group that you manage and some of the things that you did after James passed away?
Well, the end of January, I had my friends that were close and were with me and things. I just kept telling them, I was like, you don't understand a COVID loss. Like people say things, they mean well. I know they mean well, but a lot of the stuff people say to you when you're grieving is stupid. Just honestly. I
I
mean it
agree.
I mean, and I don't think, I mean, they don't mean it to hurt you, but it does.
Mhm.
And I would just kept telling people, I was like, you don't understand a COVID. Like, it's not like he passed away and I was at the hospital with him. I didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't know that we were at that point. I had no inkling that I was going to lose him. Like there was so much left unsaid. My therapist says it's unfinished business. Um, and that there's trauma added because you can't be with the person and things. So one of my friends who lives in Brooklyn messages me and she sends me a clip of my now friend Pam on CNN talking about this young widows and widowers group of COVID-19 that she started. And because, like I was 39 years old, Pam was 36, I think. You don't expect to be in that position at her age.
Yeah.
So I find the group, I joined the group. By the end of January, I'm like all in. It was my safe space. I actually made a few of my friends mad because they wanted me to do like grief share groups and stuff here, but I was like, listen, this group, and every Sunday night and every Thursday night we were doing Zooms and like we could get on there and we could cry together or we could talk together, and every person in that group was 50 or younger and had lost their spouse.
Wow.
So every single person knew what I felt, and it was my safe space. So I got pretty active in the group. Then I kind of went through a funk. Like around March or April, I kind of was like, "What am I doing with my life?" And because at that point, I didn't want to go back to work. I didn't. I just, I don't know. I was just, I guess, depressed, and I had Pamela, the one who had actually created the group. We had been talking. We were both teachers. We both have um, younger kids, and like we had a lot of similarities that we would have clicked with if we had met outside of the COVID world. But it just, I don't know, it kind of made it work better because I mean we had so much in common,
Yeah.
and her and I would text and chat frequently, and she said she was going to do a recording with CBS of our Zoom with Nora O'Donnell. And so we did a recording on one night of our chat with, like, in an interview, um, which aired on CBS News. And then I got in touch with Yahoo News, or Yahoo News got in touch with me. I really don't know at that point, but I did an interview. And I told her after the interview, I said, I may have cried for the entire last 2 hours. But my piece with Yahoo published Valentine's Day weekend. So it was still really raw. I mean, we were less than 6 weeks into it. And I said, but I felt better. And she said, see, she said, telling your story every time, everybody has told me, every time you tell your story, you heal a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So then I was like, you know what? I will tell my story to anybody and everybody that will listen, because in our small community, everybody knew James. He was like the hometown hero. Nobody could say a bad word about him. Um, Even people he arrested would message me and tell me how great he was or how much they loved him. And so, but it kind of opened everybody's eyes that, hey, COVID isn't just affecting old people, or isn't just affecting people who are like morbidly obese or anything like that. Um, so I was like, I want to keep doing this. I see what impact he's had on our community, and it kind of all goes to her. She connected me with COVID Survivors for Change. I got active with them. Um, the head of that is Chris Kosher, and he, you know, there's not a lot of people in West Virginia who are like kind of into the advocacy and stuff. So our state was one of the ones that was like less served. They've got people in bigger areas and stuff. So it just kind of worked out. Um, and I did a couple more news interviews. Um, I can't remember. At this point, everything's a blur of what order that they were or anything. But the Yahoo piece really picked up a lot. I did a podcast. I did the Stolen Goodbyes podcast, which is like an international podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then Pamela approached me about helping her moderate the group, because the group was just growing so much that between school and small kids and, still trying to live, this group was becoming our lives. Um,
And this is the widows group on
Yeah,
Facebook?
the Widows
Okay.
Creek, yeah. We still get probably 10 to 15 requests a day.
Oh,
It's very time consuming because we do vet each request. Um, just because I feel, well, both of us feel honestly that, widows can be targeted, or you're an emotional weak state anyway.
yeah.
So, and that is so many people's safe space that we fully commit to making sure that you do have a loss in the COVID community, um, you did lose your spouse. That it's not just somebody trying to come in and creep on us or spy on the group for their benefit. So started moderating the group with her in the spring. It's just, it gives me purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It lets me put my focus into, I feel like if I can help one person from the heartbreak that we've suffered, then that's better than not helping anybody at all. Um, and I jokingly said that, I'm a teacher and I can talk in front of children and things like that, but COVID has helped me find my voice. I would have rather never known this, but I also never dreamed that I'd be like on Yahoo News or any of these other news agents like CBS News or anything. And I never, ever could have imagined that I could give a speech at City Hall in New York City. I couldn't give a speech when I was in college in front of 15 classmates, let alone have the courage to stand up after the COVID march and speak. But at the same time, like, James could.
Mm-hmm.
James did not know a stranger. James could talk. Boy, he could talk. So I kind of feel like that's James helping me.
Yeah.
And like I said, it gives me something to, instead of just COVID being negative, it gives me something to focus. Um, I don't want the children who've lost a parent to be forgotten. You know, that's another aspect of it, that as a teacher, I see kids daily who have lost parents to drug overdoses, or parents are in jail, or Um, I've got a lot of kids in classes through the years who grandparents are raising them, or even great grandparents. because of opiate addictions and things like that. And I remember thinking a couple years ago that I only had like 5 kids in my class who had a traditional family. And I remember thinking how sad that was. A few years ago, one of my little guys, his mom committed suicide. And I remember I was heartbroken for that kid. I couldn't quit crying. I spent my whole weekend crying. James was worried sick about me. He was like, I've never seen you like this. You didn't even know his mom. And I just kept thinking, he's in second grade and has to live the rest of his life without his mother. And actually, I shouldn't even say committed. It's completed suicide, sorry. But I mean, and then to turn around and 3 years later, my first grader lost her daddy. And, I mean, it's just, and we weren't the perfect family, but we were, if that makes sense. Like, yeah, we fought and had arguments like everybody does, but there was never a time when I thought he wasn't my forever, or there was never a time when I thought, that we didn't have a great family. Like, he spoiled our children beyond belief. He insisted that we take a big family vacation every year. Like, we went to Disney or we went to the Bahamas, we went on cruises, because that was something he didn't get to do when he was little. And he always, like, even people he worked with would be like, oh my gosh, man, why are you taking them back to Disney? Or why are you doing this? And he was like, because I want them to have everything I didn't have. But at the same time, with him being a police officer, and before I was a teacher, I worked in EMS. So, there was a lot of time, you sacrifice a lot of time from your family when you're a first responder.
Yeah.
And he would take those 2 weeks each year, and, he wouldn't go to Disney unless we went for at least 10 days. Like, it wasn't just a weekend trip or anything. He would take those 2 weeks and he would make it all about us. He was all in. He would have his phone, but he barely answered it, like, he wanted every year to make those memories with us.
Hmm.
So it's just to go from my girls having a very involved, active father who was, he was the one who went on field trips, or he went to class parties, or took joy at a practice. I mean, it's just, to now they don't have that. And it breaks me to think of how my children are now part of the statistics of the trauma of losing a parent. And I don't want the children, I mean, if we've lost over 800,000 people, to think I think we're at like 140,000 children now who have been affected.
Yeah.
But that's one reason why I do the advocacy, is I don't want our children to suffer. I mean, obviously they're going to suffer, but I don't want them to be the forgotten victims because of all this. I've always said that 10 years from now, I don't want somebody to make a COVID joke and, Jamie hear it and her be 17 and it just catch her at the wrong moment and her start having a breakdown or start crying or something. And we're already seeing that, where COVID is a joke to some people. And
I hope it's not in 10 years. I mean, I hope it bothers me that it is, but I sincerely hope that in the next 10 years it it's serious. We look back on this with the seriousness and honor and remember the people who died and their families. Gosh, I don't want it to be a joke. Oh,
yeah, see, that's exactly how I feel. Like, I really pray that people look back and see that this destroyed people's lives, and that it wasn't a hoax, or that it wasn't a conspiracy, and that, and I pray that the people who think it's a joke don't have to find out. Like, I pray, like, that's one thing. Like, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy.
mhm.
Like, even the people who make jokes of it, and there's quite a few people. I've had to unfriend a lot of people on Facebook, just because I couldn't stand to read their posts. about how it's a joke or how it's a hoax or conspiracy. And I honestly hope that those people don't find out, but I hope that they find it in their heart to accept that it wasn't. I don't want them to find out the way I found out. Granted, we never once took it as a joke. Like, we took it serious from March 13th,
Yeah.
2020 on, and it didn't help us.
Yeah. So have you had somebody say to you that COVID isn't real?
Yes.
And how did you respond?
Um, the day, the day that I took my dog to get him fixed, we got a puppy during COVID, during the quarantine, the first shutdown, which was James's wonderful idea. So, I took him, it was March probably. So about a year after COVID starts, and I took him to the vet, and you still couldn't go in the vet's office or anything. So, but I was in the truck. They called me and told me he was ready to pick him up and to come to the door. So I'm standing at the door wearing a mask, but I'm outside. A gentleman walks up to me and says, "Oh, you must be scared." And he said it real, I don't know, like in a real weird voice. Like it was just, I don't, or maybe it just went through my brain. It was really weird. And I was like, "Excuse me?" And he said, "You're wearing that mask?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he was older than me. I wasn't going to argue with him, wasn't going to fight with him. I grew up in a military household. Um, you treat everybody with respect. Yes, sir. No, sir. So I just, I was trying to be short with him for him to get the hint, but not really. And I just said, "Yes, sir, I'm wearing my mask." And he said, "Well, you must be scared then if you're wearing a mask." He said, I had it. I had it, and it ain't bad. It's nothing worse than a flu." And I just looked at him and I said, "Well, I did have it, and I thought it was very worse than the flu." I said, "And I lost my husband to it." Now, in my mind, I thought most human beings would say, "Oh, I'm sorry," and drop it. But not this man. He continued to proceeded to ask me, well, what was wrong with him?
Oh.
Like he had to justify a reason for my husband's death. And I said, "He died of COVID pneumonia." And he said, "No, but what was wrong with him?" I said, "Nothing, sir." And he said, "Well, he had to have something wrong for it to get him that bad." And I said, "No, sir." I said, "He was a young, healthy police officer." And he said, "Was he a police officer in Bluefield?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Oh, I remember seeing that on the news." And I said, "Yeah, it was on the news, and I think it was on every local news channel. It was in the papers, because, like I said, James was the hometown hero. Everybody knew him." Um, and he said, "Well, I like it was like he just was trying to think of the next insult." And he said, "Well, most people do okay with it." And I said, "Well, not really, because by this point I was learning. I've joined the advocacy groups, and I'm seeing how much nationwide." I was like, "Yeah, but not really. It's not all elderly people, and it's not." So I'm like trying to educate him while keeping myself cool.
Yeah.
Finally, bring my dog out, and he asked while the doctor's office, like while the vet tech is telling me about Jock, "Hey, make sure he keeps his cone on," things like that. Um, he interrupts her and says, "Do you know her husband died of COVID?" And it was like all I could do to not punch this man. Like I lost all sense of all sense. I think I lost all common sense. And I grabbed my dog, and the vet tech was very aware of my situation because the veterinarian was is my neighbor. Like
Mhm.
they know. They are my next door neighbors. So like I get in the truck and I'm like shaking and I just start crying. And my girls are in the back seat and they're like, "What happened?" And I was like, "That guy back there is making jokes and talking about COVID and telling me your daddy didn't die from COVID." And Julia's Julia is like my meek, mellow, laid back, go with the flow kid. And she says, I can't believe you didn't throat punch him. And I was like, well, I said, I can't say that the idea didn't cross my mind. And I go to back out, and she said, or you could just back over him with the truck and claim temporary insanity. And I was like, okay, we watched too much Forensic Files. And I, I see other people who I thought were good friends who will make posts on Facebook about how we shouldn't be scared of COVID or we shouldn't do this. And then, the whole vaccine debate everywhere. My entire family's vaccinated. I believe in science. I trust science. But also, I'm not stupid and I know that COVID is still very real. And I mean, when I go into a crowd, I still have my mask on. It's not fear. At this point, it's self preservation because if my children lose me, who do they have?
Yeah.
And I don't want to spread it to someone else. There's so much that is associated with it that I don't know. Like, I just don't understand why people are so heartless about it. I don't understand why people would say, that people who are living in fear of COVID, well, heck yeah, I am because COVID has wrecked my life.
Hmm.
Like, I still go, my girls and I still went to Disney this summer. We wore masks. We probably washed our hands way too much. But you know what? We went to Florida and made it home COVID free. We did everything safely. We flew to California because James had promised them that we were going to Los Angeles. We did fly. When we went out, Los Angeles was in a mandatory mask ordinance still.
Yeah.
So I felt safe everywhere that we went. We flew home from Los Angeles. I went to New York in August to do the COVID march and to give the speech at City Hall. So I don't really feel like it makes me mad when I see people say that to imply that I'm living with fear. I've still traveled.
Hmm.
Um, my girls have. Julia is in the marching band at school, and she runs cross country. She participated in both activities. Jame does a lot of dance classes. Jame will be going to New York next summer, or this summer now, I guess,
Yeah.
if we can scrounge up the funds for that for a dance academy that she was invited to. So I feel like if we were living in fear, we wouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
I think it's called living responsibly. Like,
Yeah.
yes, we wear masks, but we're vaccinated. I've got my booster. Um, it blows my mind to see adults question the vaccine when my 7-year old begged for it. Like, Jamie cried when the vaccine came out and she couldn't get it. Then when Julia's age group was able to get it and Jamie couldn't, Jamie cried again. The day that they gave the approval for the vaccine, the very next day, Jamie had me make her an appointment. She walked straight in. She got her shot. She didn't shed a tear, and that's, I guess that's just where what we've experienced has changed or made it to where she knew that how serious it was. But if a 7-year-old can want to do their part so desperately, um, I don't understand why everybody else can't.
Yeah.
I mean, my kid was at dance class doing a crazy little dance, and everybody was like, "What are you doing?" And she was like, "I get to get my vaccine. I get to get." I mean, and like dancing around and jumping around. You ever seen a 7-year-old happy to go get a shot? I mean, my 12-year-old, I still have to beg, "Hey, let's do." So it's just, I don't know. And then my stepson, which he's my son. I mean, after this long, he's my stepson. I mean, he's my son. He's my boy. He lost his biological mom when he was 15. He lost James at 21. He lost his grandma 6 weeks after losing his dad. So, and Tyler is he's I'm not saying it because he's mine, but he's such a good kid. And he's 22. He's not a kid, but he is a kid.
Yeah.
And he has suffered so much loss.
Yeah.
And he could have went losing his mom at 15. He could have went down a different path.
Mm-hmm.
And then now losing his dad. So essentially he's lost both parents. He's, at 21 years old.
Yeah.
That's heavy.
It's heavy. It's so rare too to be that young and have neither of your
Right.
parents alive. Yeah.
And instead of it making him cold hearted or changed him or anything, more so, if anything, he has stepped up 10 times for the girls more than you would expect a big brother to. I mean, he's been in their lives and they love him and everything, but now, like, he makes it a purpose to play with them, to take Julia on outings. Like, he has a girlfriend. I guess he has apparently made it clear to her that, hey, I got to take care of my little sisters. When we did the Washington Post article, he told, when they interviewed him for the Washington Post, he said that um, he was glad that he had been through it before because he knew how his sisters were feeling and he knew what he would have needed
Mm.
when he was a 15-year-old. And now he wants to give that to them. I mean, it's just,
Wow.
it's so sad to see the heartbreak in him, but it's amazing to see the man that it has created him to be because of his loss.
Yeah.
Now he has become so supportive to his sisters, and the three of them are what get me through every day. Not even, you know, Tyler and I have always been close since he was 5 years old, I guess. I think when James and I first started dating, or he had just turned 6. He was 5 or 6. And we've always been close. Even when him and his dad would butt heads and not speak, him and I always kept a connection open, and I've always loved him as my own. And but this year was the first year that he ever actually told me Happy Mother's Day, and
Oh.
like we've all gotten so close. But he reminds me so much of his dad. He walks like him. He talks like him. He's a smart aleck like him. But those three are like, they each have a piece of James that is like, Tyler walks like him, talks like him. Julia has his temper. Like, they all three have a different part of him
Mm-hmm.
that's what keeps me going.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story and James's story and your family story with me.
Thank you.
It helps. It's emotional. It's emotional, but every time I listen, it eases a little bit. It heals a little bit.
Yeah, it really does. I took the girls, we did Comfort Zone Camp, which I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but it's
No, I
an
haven't.
amazing, amazing camp. They're in their 20th year. It's founded by a woman who lost both parents by the time she was 10, I think. And it is a safe place, essentially, for kids 7 to 17 um, who have lost, you have to either have lost your parent, a guardian, or a sibling to attend. It is completely paid for. So, like, families don't have to worry about the cost of their child being able to attend. But it's a place you can go. Like, Julia's made comments before that she hates being the kid at middle school whose dad died. Or she hates being that, because we do live in a smaller community. So everybody knows everybody and everybody knows our story.
Yeah.
But so she feels different because of that. But at that camp, every kid there had either lost their mom, dad, brother, or sister. So
Mhm.
everybody there, nobody's judging you or looking at you different because everybody has experienced the same thing, and it's just like a safe space. And we did that, and it has honestly been one of the highlights of our year. It's something that I can see us doing, because they have a parent program at some of the camps also. So it's something that I could see us doing every year until my kids age out. Julia loved it so much and enjoyed it that she was talking about how even once she ages out at 17, she would like to volunteer her time as a counselor. They have big buddies. Each kid gets a big
Oh,
buddy. Um, but that place, and they're nationwide, but it was so, that was like the one weekend this year that I felt like we got to completely be ourselves. If we cried, we cried. We didn't have to try to hide it, or, every person there had something going on. So I look forward to getting them. I think I'm going to try to get them to a couple of camps this year,
yeah.
even if I don't go to the parent program, but just because I want my kids to have like the support system that I found in the COVID community. I want my kids to have people that they have stuff in common with. I don't want them to feel excluded or outcast or whatever.
Yeah.
So I hope that they can build their own little. So I'm not ready to turn them loose on Facebook to build a community, but I mean, at least they have things like that. So
Yeah, if you could send me just the information on that comfort zone camp, I can put that in the notes for this show for other people who don't
yeah,
know about it.
it's I had never heard of it,
I haven't either.
and randomly a friend shared a video of it,
Hmm.
and I was like, and I talked to the founder and CEO, and I was like, wow, yeah, this is amazing. And it truly was. Like, it, they gave my girls, like, they did some coping skills, like mechanisms that, like, things they can do to remember their daddy, but help them through, like, a bad day and stuff. And it was just
Yeah.
amazing.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that's the show, everyone. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com. If you like this episode, please share the show. Share it with your friends, share it on your social media, and once you've done that, rate and review this podcast on your favorite listening platform. And then go rate it on Apple Podcast, because that's where most of our new listeners come from. Ratings and reviews are the main way this podcast finds new listeners. So please share the show. Until next time.